Good afternoon and welcome along to this special Chartered Manager 20 Years On event. You may be aware already that this year CMI celebrates its 75th anniversary, and 2022 also marks 20 years since we first introduced the Chartered Manager Award. I'm Matt Roberts, I'm the Director of Membership here at CMI, and today I'm going to be joined by a number of fabulous guests as we'll ponder the changes that have happened in management and leadership practice over the last 20 years, start to turn our attention to the future and what may change going forwards, and also to learn a little bit more about the importance of becoming a chartered manager and the difference that it's made to our guests. I'm delighted to be joined by three people today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Cindy Rampersad. Cindy is a companion of the CMI, non-executive director at Sage Housing, and the former senior vice president at Pearson Education. Cindy, it's great to have you with us today. And Cindy, of course, you're a judge on our Chartered Manager of the Year award. So thank you for all that you've been doing in that. I know you've really enjoyed seeing submissions over the last couple of years for the award.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see you again. And thanks for inviting me along today.
Thank you. I'd also like to introduce Manisha Mistry. Manisha is the winner of our Chartered Manager of the Year award from 2020. Manisha's role is Portfolio Director for Digital Culture and Collaboration at Rolls-Royce. Manisha, great to see you again, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
And last but certainly by no means least, we have Simon Sihanko. Simon is the current Chartered Manager of the Year. Simon won the award in 2021. And Simon, as you can see on screen, is with Northumbrian Water Group, where he heads up the wastewater networks. Simon, congratulations once again on your win last year, and thanks very much for joining us today.
No, thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here joining you guys. Thank you.
Good stuff. Well, look, we'll run through a few questions today, guys. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on, as I say, what's changed over recent years, advice that you might give to your younger self if you were just starting out, knowing now what you know. And as I said earlier on, we'll turn our thoughts to the future as well. For those of you that are watching us live today, if you've got a question that you'd like to pose to one of the guys, please do type it into the live chat, and we'll get through as many questions as we can towards the end of today's broadcast. But let's get started, guys, with that initial question around if you could wind back the clock and speak to your younger self, knowing what you now know about management and leadership. What would you tell yourself if you could go back to you on that first day of becoming a manager? And Manisha, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that first, please.
That's a really big question. I think one of the biggest things for me, and especially given where we are today with leadership and management as a whole, it's that your experience doesn't need to come from a work setting. You know, there's so many interactions that we take and we act upon day in, day out that actually call on that. Don't sit there worrying whether you've done it before or not done it before. Judge from the relatable experiences that actually as a human you have, because that's the biggest thing now that we're needing, is that human interaction. It's the kind of the empathetic part of being who you are and helping others on that journey. And if I'd have known that when I was younger, I think I could have felt much more confident in taking those first steps, in not worrying about what others might be expecting of me, and therefore just being more natural in who I'm trying to present, because it's actually me and it's not this fictitious character that's supposed to be out there, you know, crusading along and making sure that we're delivering to customer deliverables. So I guess it's that.
Absolutely. Good advice, and I think that's really encouraging to anybody who is starting out. The fact that it doesn't matter that you don't necessarily yet have years of management and leadership experience under your belt. There are other things in your life that you can draw upon, you know, in those early days, and those human qualities we've heard so much about over the past couple of years, in particular, really coming to the fore for leaders. Simon, what about yourself? If you could travel back in time, what would you be advising yourself?
Can I be greedy and offer my younger self 2 bits of advice, please, Matt?
Yeah, go for it, please. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no limit on this session.
Okay. I think the first thing is that actually, for anybody just starting out, it's actually normal and it's natural to get things wrong, to make errors, to make what with hindsight were bad decisions. And as long as an individual has made those decisions or taken them actions for the right reasons, then that is okay. It's purely part of the learning process. And as long as somebody is able to reflect and look back on those things and say, actually, that wasn't quite the right thing to do. If I have another experience like that, I'm going to do something different, then that's fine. So I think that first thing's really, it's about those negative experiences, them learning experiences, that anxiety, those sleepless nights. That's natural, but it's just about learning and how we build on that. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I'd probably advise is just about trying to encourage people to work hard to expose themselves professionally. Mentoring, coaching, seminars, training, reading journals, whatever it might be, but not at the expense of your core role. So I think a lot of us, we've all got our day-to-day job, but I think sometimes people can be distracted by what we class as professional or personal development. It's about having that balance, trying to have a nice balance between the two things. So yeah, two quite different bits of advice, but I think both important for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. So a mindset around being prepared to learn from mistakes, and take the learnings on board as you go, and also getting that balance right between delivering your objectives in the day-to-day role, but having an eye on where you need to go next with your development.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Great points. Thank you, Simon. Cindy, what about you? What's your view on this one?
Well, it's as Manisha said, it's a big question, and wow, if we all knew what we knew now, way in the beginning, wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, I think I'd probably agree with everything that Simon and Manisha have said. For me, I think it's probably about being your authentic self. I think it's okay to be you and be different in a work context as a leader. And I think all the comments that have been made around you're always learning is really important. But so being authentic, I think, is really, really important in everything that you do, be it about the business results, how you interact with customers, how you interact with your peers and your team. The other one, which I said to somebody recently that I mentor, which is take time to do the stuff for yourself. So it's not just about the business and the results. And I think this goes to Simon's point, which is build networks, lean in, learn from others, keep curious and keep fresh in terms of your kind of agility as a leader, and in the business that you're in. So those would be, being authentic and just reaching out and building those networks.
Fabulous. Thanks, Cindy. I think if we did have that time machine and we could go back and advise our former selves, I'd prefer you three to come back and advise me when I was 21, 22, rather than me doing it. Those are really great points. One of the things that sort of strikes me at the core, I think, of part of what each of the three of you have said is that it's having that sort of consciousness of, okay, I may have made a mistake, but it's an opportunity to learn, or have I sort of got the right exposure to people that can help me in the forms of mentors or in the form of networking, etc. And I guess part of the trick there is actually taking some time to reflect, and just really sort of do that on a fairly regular basis. I personally find that's a very important part of how I work now, but didn't always do so. And one of the things that I found in the run-up to becoming a chartered manager myself was that many other chartered managers were saying what a great opportunity the process of becoming chartered was to just do a bit of reflection and just to take a step back. And I don't know how you guys felt about that and whether that was a useful part of the journey of becoming chartered. Manisha, Simon, I don't know whether there's anything you'd like to add on that.
Yeah, no, for me, it was definitely a huge part of it. And in fact, it's something that I've continued ever since. I think we get so lost in what we do. And it's, again, to Simon's point, we forget to take not just a step back, but actually acknowledge and pat ourselves on the back with the progress that's been made, to the degree that then says where next, and gives us that ability to really be bold in where next, not just say, well, the path is only this. And I think when I remember when I was doing the application, I did it quite in advance of the submission date, because I didn't really know where to start. And I don't mean that as in the process wasn't clear. It was more, I felt like there was a lot that I could say, but I needed to understand what I was saying and why. And I think that's one of the parts of the reflection process, is that why is that important to you, and what does that mean? How do you take that forward? And does anyone else know that that's important to you, particularly those in your network who can then help you make that bigger transition to something else? And so both in the chartering process as well as the awarding process, I think it's a really good habit to form. And it also helps you in your management of others and your coaching of others, because it's really strange how much I lean back into that step process that I took.
Absolutely. Simon, what about yourself?
I think Manisha's hit a number of the key things on the head. I think it's a skill. I think having that ability to reflect, but almost in a balanced fashion, where you highlight and acknowledge, and you're aware of some of the positive things you've done and some of your real strengths. But equally, not everybody can look at themselves and go, actually, I've not done this very well, or actually, I've not handled this situation very well. How can I adapt? How can I tweak? And how can I learn? And it's funny, in preparation for today, I went and dug out. I thought, what was the process for chartership? So 5-6 years ago, I went and looked back at the form, and it's great, really, because I remember having the conversation at the time with the person who assessed me. But you almost do have to go through that process of self-reflection in quite a lot of detail in building up a credible portfolio to present. And I think Manisha's right. Now, as you go through your career, you're quite often asked, you have a midterm appraisal, or you have a catch-up and a one-to-one. What's working well? What's not working well? So that sort of discipline that we've talked about as part of chartership, I think can bring benefits in all of our day-to-day working, personal and professional lives. So, yeah, nothing more to add for that.
Great, thank you. Cindy, in a moment, we're going to come on to sort of just taking a look over how maybe management and leadership styles have changed over the 20 years since the Chartered Manager Award was implemented. But I know you do a lot of mentoring and advising of people, at various stages of their careers. But this piece about reflection, does that resonate with you in terms of its importance?
Yeah, I think it is really important. And I think one of the things I'd say, to the point about the last 20 years is I don't think people very often in their careers stop and come up for air. And actually, very often they've been focused just on the organizational goals of kind of profit, shareholder value, whatever it is. And there's been less about the how. So one of the things I think in terms of reflections around leadership is the how and the values, and going back to that, bringing your kind of authentic self. But I've lost my trail. What was your question again?
No, I think you've answered it perfectly, Cindy, and you're actually giving a lovely segue into that next question about the way in which management and leadership has changed over the last 20 years. So reflection is obviously playing an increasingly important role for you and those that you're working with. But perhaps lead us on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to carry on because I think not enough has changed in the last 20 years. So it's great that we're kind of celebrating it. And actually, one of the lovely things about the 75th anniversary and the series of talks that you're hosting and you and Anna are hosting together, which is really focusing on where the barriers are and what still needs to change going forward, I think is really important. But I think the last 2 years have probably been the accelerator for what needs to change. So the focus on, are we diverse enough in our organizations? Are we really tuned in to who our customers and consumers and beneficiaries are? What does our workforce need to look like? And the importance of the workforce to make sure that we can respond to the beneficiaries. And I've been doing some work recently with a couple of organizations and really focusing on the D in DE&I. And what's been really interesting is that people come back and say they hadn't really understood the importance of diversity in making sure that an organization is truly successful around profitability. So I think some stuff has changed in 20 years, but actually we are being more intentional about what needs to change going forward around economic value of organizations, but also doing it the right way, showing up the right way. And I think some of that actually is being driven by customers and employees and people holding organizations more to account in terms of how they do what they do. So it's not just about the profit, but it's about how you make the profit, and it's about the values, and it's about the social kind of economic piece as well. So yeah, I think quite a lot still needs to change, Matt, but you know, some progress has been made.
Yeah, indeed. I completely agree with you about the point about employees, almost activism starting to lead to the leaders in organizations sort of embracing certain challenges in ways that they may not have done previously. There was a really interesting article actually in the last CMI magazine about exactly that point. And I think it's got an incredibly important role to play societally, but increasingly within organizations, as you say. And really interested that, you know, over that 20-year period, maybe actually the pace of change and the improvements that could have been delivered through a greater appreciation of diversity, not just because it's the right thing to do, but actually because it helps businesses and organizations of all types perform better, was also sort of chugging along without any great sort of real impact in that 18 years, some small steps maybe, but then a real acceleration over the last 2 years with all that we've faced. I think that's a really interesting observation about the last couple of decades. Manisha, keen to hear your views on this. What do you think's changed over the last 20 years, and what still needs to be improved?
I think Cindy's absolutely right. Not enough has changed, but I think that's also partly for us to say, well, let's own it and make sure we drive that. I think we're starting to see younger and younger individuals being put in a position of responsibility, be it managing teams or accountabilities that wouldn't have ordinarily sat at that level, if that makes sense. So they're entering a world of work that assumes a level of responsibility that they may not have experienced up until now in any shape or form. And so we have to think about where those community leads are, where are those connections all the way back. And it was an interesting conversation I was having with some of the CMI team actually around, you know, we talk about chartership and what it offers at a point where we're actually establishing ourselves in a management role or a leadership role, or have done so for a period of time. I would argue that the next generation that comes through will have already had to do some of that in their own educational journey or in their own living journey. And so what can we be doing to almost help them see that in themselves and role model, and not worry about finding somebody like them, more to the DE&I point, but actually see themselves as that role model, and therefore can exemplify that at a much younger age group and not worry that that's a responsibility I can't shoulder. And so I think there's a huge part that we have a responsible need for and a responsibility to do in helping that next wave come through, because that will be absolutely game changing for organizations. And I'm seeing it now. I have an incredibly neurodiverse team that we have within our organization, and we are benefiting in spades in ways that we never thought. But it's hard. And it's hard because as a manager and as a leader, I don't no longer have a responsibility for myself. I really do have a bigger, much more complex responsibility for an organization that wants to self-form, that wants to feel empowered and go, but may in itself not understand what that actually translates to, how they can do that, where the rest of us and the wider business goes, I know it's not conforming to the norms that we're used to, but it's absolutely the right thing we need, and therefore embracing and welcoming of that. And that's not due to, you know, that's not due to our own aversions of it. It's just we've never seen it. We're starting to go into a bit of uncharted territory, and I think that's where there's a lot more, as Cindy says, to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that, you know, your point about trying to help younger people to become more confident in demonstrating the kind of behaviors, styles of leadership, etc., from a much earlier position, and becoming role models is incredibly important. We know, again, from talking to chartered managers, how important both self-confidence and self-awareness is for good leaders. And so I think if we can start to really engender that level of awareness and confidence amongst younger leaders, as you say, Manisha, will be moving in very much the right direction. I'd really like to explore now just a little bit about what becoming chartered and what being chartered means to you. You're all chartered managers, and you know, as I said earlier on, we're lucky to be joined by Manisha and Simon, who are the last 2 years winners of the Chartered Manager of the Award, Chartered Manager of the Year award, and Cindy is one of the judges for the competition. So I'm really keen just to understand a little bit from you. Perhaps we'll start with Simon on this one. What it meant to you becoming chartered, why it's been important to your career thus far, and any maybe some tips and advice that you'd pass on to others that are thinking about becoming chartered going forwards.
It's about 7 questions there, Matt.
It's not a memory test. I'll happily repeat them as we go. But yeah, firstly, most important thing about being chartered in terms of your career.
I think the first thing for any of us who take, I guess, leadership or managerial responsibilities seriously, I saw chartership as almost being like external accreditation or external validation that actually the way I go about work, the way I go about things professionally was basically top notch. It met a standard. It fit amongst a number of key criteria and expectations. Because I think a lot of us over our careers will go on training courses at work. We might do certain qualifications, but I think chartership for me was almost validation that actually you'd hit and you'd demonstrated a reasonably high threshold. So I think that was the first thing for me about chartership. It was almost nice to be told by somebody external that actually you're doing a lot of the right things, you're working the right way, and you need to be pleased and proud of that. So I think that's the first answer to the first part of your question. I can't remember the other 6, Matt.
Well, let me help you out then. So great, that was sort of part of your motivation to become chartered. Now you've been chartered for a number of years. So when you think about that period since becoming chartered, how has it been important to your career? Has it been confirmation of what you felt about that external validation, or have there been other things that have come to the fore?
I think really, Matt, what it's done is it's almost not that I've needed the encouragement, but it's given me another reason, I think, to try and stay at the top of my game, keep learning, keep refreshing, keep developing. Some of the things we mentioned earlier in this conversation that are important from a personal development perspective, I think it's just kept me honest. Not that I think I needed keeping honest, but just to try and make sure as a leader and as a professional that I've kept towards the top of my game. And I think being able to say I'm a chartered manager, because I think in our business, I think there's only a couple of us, and that's 3,000 people. So I think for me to be able to say I'm a chartered manager means something, and I should therefore demonstrate and act as a role model as best I can.
Absolutely. Okay, good stuff. We'll come back to all the other questions in a moment, Simon, and I'll just ask Manisha for her observations. So Manisha, becoming chartered, why was that important to you, and what impact has that had on your career?
Similar to Simon in the sense of why it was important to me. I guess I was very conscious that you go through the motions, you'll have a corporate expectation as well. So there'll be values, behaviors you need to exhibit at a certain role. There'll be, don't get me wrong, there's training and the support there, but it's almost understanding what the gaps are, or what are the things you need to prepare for as you move on, as you keep progressing, and how can you start to signal that back in almost into the organization if you feel something's kind of amiss or not quite right, you know. And I think being able to advocate rather than just sit and complain. I've always said the better place is to come with suggestions of improvement, but that means I need to know, well, where is that kind of benchmark? How do I show I've got a seal of approval, as you will, or I am thinking of this as a rounded position, not just as a task orientated or a deliverable. So that was the first bit of why. And actually what I loved about the process, as we've talked about, is it really got you thinking about your journey. It wasn't a tick box exercise. It's really trying to explore how you have developed personally and where you see your areas of vulnerability or development, and whether you need to bridge that or whether it's about seeking others in your community who can help. Because I do think that we sometimes concern ourselves with making up for deficits by developing ourselves, when actually, no, you should be increasing your network. You should be thinking about who else is in your team, because you now give them a validity, you give them a sense of purpose and ownership. And it's something we've really worked hard on, to make sure you've got the right characteristics, not just all of the skills. The second bit of going through the process, then, not just a validation, but it kind of helped me know where I could go and what I really liked, and what of this is me, and what of it is, as I said, a gap that just needs to be bridged in another way, so that you're starting to augment what you do. And I always say that to everyone, you know, it's not about being the best, it's being good at what you're good at, and making sure people can see that. So it's absolutely allowed me to do that. And where I've gone from doing that to today, I could never have even predicted. And I think that's testament to Simon's point. It keeps you honest, it keeps you going, it kind of motivates. So they're the two kind of answers I'd have for the questions you've given, Matt.
Fabulous, thank you. Cindy, I wonder what your observations would be on the importance of chartered, and why people should be thinking about becoming chartered.
So, I mean, I think I think Manisha and Simon are great examples of why chartered is so powerful. And certainly when I look back at the judging process, you know, the things that stood out were actually that there were individuals that were looking at their own development. They were being reflective. They were looking outside the organization. They were incredibly customer focused, but also aware of employees and values. And I think really thinking about, I talked about this earlier, the business measures, but the kind of cultural and the how, not just for the business, but also within themselves. One of the really powerful things about CMI is, you know, you become chartered and you're part of this network and this family. So I'm a companion. And actually, I think what it also gives you is access to others and to other others in other sectors, so that you can continually keep fresh and challenge yourself, but also learn things and take it back to your own organization. So the example I would give is, I'm part of the race group, but also the international group. And one of the real benefits of that is I'm meeting people from a range of different industries with different perspective, doing things differently, that I'm learning, I'm contributing, I can take back to my clients and to organizations when I was in an organization previously. But I think there's something quite powerful about the way CMI is set up, and not just becoming a chartered manager, but actually that continual journey and that continual development. And today is a really good example, you know, where you've got two of last year's winners here talking about leadership of the future, and you are the leaders of the future and leading now. So that's the power of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Cindy. So Simon, Manisha, any tips for anybody that's thinking about becoming chartered? What are the sort of pitfalls for them to avoid, and the things to really sort of play to their strengths around? Simon, do you want to lead us off on that one?
I think just one thing for me, and I think if somebody's interested, look at the competencies, look at the criteria, look at the rules, essentially, and if you're convinced, and if you're sure, you've got the evidence, you've got the credibility, you've got the experience to basically demonstrate you can do what's being asked of you, apply and enjoy it. Because actually, you should actually enjoy part of that process. If you've got that experience and that you've got them experiences and the achievements and the credibility to go through the process, go for it and enjoy it. And enjoy it, because actually, it's nice to be able to talk to somebody about what you've learned and your experiences and your reference points and what you've done on the back of them. And that's one of the big things. I remember where I was sat at this point in time when I had the sit-down discussion with the assessor. I remember where I was sat. I remember the experience, and that's because I enjoyed it, because the way the discussion went, it brought out the best in me as an individual. So in summary, if you think you've got it, apply and enjoy the process. Don't wait. Give it a go. You've got nothing to lose.
Fabulous. And we'll come to Manisha in a moment, but I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree with what you've just said, Simon. And I hadn't thought about it this way, actually, but until what you've just said. But I too can remember exactly where I was when I was having that discussion with my assessor. And yeah, it felt during and then certainly afterwards such a positive experience, actually, to be able to take the time to chart the sort of impact and the journey, and then the challenge that comes with it of, okay, well, what am I going to do next? So yeah, wholeheartedly agree with you. I had a very, very similar experience of the assessment. Manisha, what about you? What would the tips be that you'd give to others thinking about applying?
I think it's, again, I completely agree with what Simon said. I would see it as a voyage, see it as a point of discovery as well. And I'd almost say that even if you don't think you're there yet, talk to others. You have so many parts of your facet that you won't even know about, that you will gain insight into through those conversations that allow you then to maybe not evidence you're there yet, but show what you can do to get there. And part of this process is about, what are you doing to bridge gaps? I mentioned it before. It's not all about saying you're there 100%. It's also showing how you're learning and developing the areas that you may not be quite 100% there. And so I see chartership as chartering a voyage of discovery into yourself. And that means that start early, see it as that journaling activity, but make it part of your conversation with maybe your coach or your mentor or your manager, because that's the best way to, A, get there at the end, more importantly, because that's what you're seeking in terms of something that substantiates who you are. But it might help you get somewhere else that you never thought you'd be. And I always think that that's leadership. It's not just leading others, it's leading yourself. And so, you know, for me, that would be my tip. Don't be discouraged. They're not assessing to check you off. They're helping you tell your story.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Well, thank you both. We will turn to some questions from the audience in a few minutes' time. I've got a couple of last questions that I'd like to throw at you guys, but just to make you aware that if what you've heard already today is making you sort of think about becoming chartered, there's a link in the chat to where you can find out a whole lot more about the routes to becoming chartered. And now's a fabulous time to take the plunge. In fact, at the moment, you can save a bit on your assessment fees as well. So link is in the chat there for you to find out a little bit more about the process that the guys are speaking so positively about. Before we turn to our questions from the audience, I just want to focus on the award itself, as in the Chartered Manager of the Year award. And Cindy, really, if I can come to you first, just to get your thoughts on why that Chartered Manager of the Year award is so important to the profession of management and leadership.
I mean, I think it kind of sets a really good process in place for the individuals, but also for organizations. And I think it's partly the rigor, it's the recognition, but it's also the personal development and the reflection, the stuff that Manisha and Simon have been talking about so powerfully. And I think also it kind of allows individuals to, and I've said this already, to think about the business and themselves in the round. So think about customers and business goals, but also think about employees and themselves and values and culture. So and think about how they show up and how they lead. But I think Manisha's point about also thinking about how you lead yourself and what you're doing yourself and the authenticity. So for me, I think it's about helping people to be reflective and developers as really impactful, successful leaders that are, you know, tuned into themselves, tuned into their business and their customers, but really tuned into their teams and thinking about what success looks like from a kind of human empathy point of view, as well as the kind of business goals and objectives. So that, you know, I think, and all of the applications that we saw were incredible, and really the kind of the range of leadership and the talent out there is quite fantastic. And you know, Simon and Manisha, like I said, are great examples of individuals who are doing the self-reflection, doing the learning, thinking about customers, thinking about employees, and really thinking about values and the how.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that sort of commitment to ethics and values is right at the heart of the charter itself. I think that's a really important point that that each of you have made actually at various stages of this conversation. So, Simon, what difference has it made to you being the Chartered Manager of the Year? I'm really keen just to hear a bit about that.
Well, it feels like I actually had the badge that long, to be honest, because think about it, in a way, it only feels like a number of months. But I think there's a couple of things, and some of it does link back to one of the answers to your questions from earlier. So I think this, and as we know, as managers and leaders, everybody's motivated in different ways. It's just natural. Different things tick different people's boxes and drive different people. And I think for me, one of the things that has always been useful, and I included this in the application, so Cindy won't mind me reminding her, but I've always been motivated to a degree and driven by having positive feedback, and by sometimes just saying, actually, you're doing the right things, you're working on the right lines. And what that typically means for me is I just try and do more and try and do better and try and be more effective. So for me, I think having the recognition, going through the process, having that external validation as such, has just helped me just have that confidence to say, at the level you're working and doing what you do, you're doing all the right things. Keep working that way, keep using that same approach and keep developing. So for me, it just, I guess, made me stand 10 foot tall and go, keep doing, you're doing lots of the right things. And also I think it's just given me that little bit of a platform and more confidence just to try and bring other leaders along and try and to get some more people thinking in lines with how we're talking in this conversation, reflect, learn, develop, improve. So I think it's just given me a bit more of a platform and voice to do that. And I keep this by my desk now every day. And I think that's partly, when I'm in work, I'm just thinking, hey, just remember you're pretty good, and have confidence in yourself and back yourself with what you do.
That's great to hear. I'm glad to see the trophy there. Manisha, what about you? What difference has the award from 2020 made to your career?
Oh, huge. I mean, the confidence bit that Simon refers to is without doubt the number one thing. But I think it's also allowed me to be really bold. So the submission I put in was around how we fundamentally changed the way we thought about a particular thing, around transformation, and how we started 100% from people first. And that was, whilst it's nothing new or novel, actually, for where we were as an organization, that felt like a very a hard step to take. And I guess when I was trying to work out how to narrate that story, the award process really helped me dig into saying, what is this though? What is it really about? And how do you connect the business value to the cultural value, to the what it's meant for me, to the how did it feel for everyone? And that's now really stood its testament, because I'm able to articulate in a way that I never did, not on that, but about everything really. And not be afraid to take those big leaps of faith. I think the point that Simon makes around you're good at this, you're doing all the right things. It's about being able to project that in anything that you're doing. And I stand here 2 years on, now about to take on an incredible role that I never thought I would do for some time. And I'm doing it in 2 years. And I can't wait to tell everyone, because I can't just yet. But when that does come out, I'm not just proud because I've got there, but I'm sitting there going, I never thought this would happen yet. And so hopefully that role model, that beaconing for others, to Simon's point of how can you take others on that journey too? I do feel that a large proportion of that came from me putting in that submission, and Cindy and others saying, wow, yeah, this one is one that we definitely want to shortlist and put forward. So go on, it's reliant on so many others, but it starts with you, right? And it starts with believing in what you've got, but learn to tell your story. And that's all I would say is the biggest part here is, how are you going to do not just the elevator pitch, but how are you going to tell people of you in what you've been doing? Because that's what's going to get you where you want to go.
Matt, can I come back in as well on this one very quickly? Because it is just so inspiring listening to both Manisha and Simon. But, leadership is so important, but it's not taught, actually. And going back to your point about 20 years ago, it was very much by default, by osmosis. If you were good technically, you'd kind of move up the ladder. But actually, the bit around that Manisha's saying about being able to tune into your team, your peers, people around you is so important. And creating something that is a framework that says, this is what good looks like in leadership is so important. And I think it's previously it was leadership development was about senior level, or it was technical skills, but actually leadership happens throughout an organization. And I think empowering young people at all levels, supporting them, creating the framework, creating the networks, I think is really powerful for organizations, but on an individual level. And as I said earlier, Manisha and Simon are great examples of what success looks like. And it's setting young people up for success in their leadership journey rather than failure. So that's why I think it's so powerful. Just thought I'd come back in listening to you.
Thanks, Cindy. And like you, I've been absolutely inspired by what Manisha and Simon have told us about what that award has meant to them, and thoroughly enjoyed speaking with all three of you today across the subjects we've covered so far. We've got a few minutes remaining, and I'd like just to take a couple of questions from the audience. And we had a number of pre-submitted questions, and also some that have been submitted live. So we'll just run through a couple of those over the next few minutes. The first one is a really big question, actually, so I'm definitely going to throw this at you three. And the question is, what does management look like 10 years from now? And does it need a different title? Maybe the word manager has become obsolete. So big question, no prep time for you guys, but you've inspired us thus far. So what are your views on that particular question? Perhaps we'll come to Simon first on that one.
Okay, I think two things. I think we've seen it in the last 2 years where we've almost fast-tracked this whole world of remote working, increased reliance and use of technology in the workplace. Some of us will be doing it better than others. And I think that's going to become an increasing thing, not just now, but over the next 5 and 10 years. But not just technology and remote working, but increasing flexibility to get the best out of ourselves and the best of the people we work with. In terms of the question about management, one of the things I've never quite got my head around, and I need to have a chat with somebody really at CMI around this, is we call us, the Chartered Management Institute. A lot of the things we've spoken about in today's conversation have been about leadership. So maybe just a question there or a seed to plant for discussion for another day. But I'm not sure Chartered Management Institute fully does justice to the things we try and promote and develop as an institute.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that word management doesn't quite cover the full gambit in terms of the impacts and the skills that we're seeing from you guys and from many in my community. Cindy, what's your view on this big question?
Well, there's something wrong with the word manager, isn't there? Because the beginning is MAN. so we ought to be challenging ourselves on that. And I think, I'd agree with Simon. It's about leadership. But 20 years out, what's it going to look like? Hopefully it'll look a little bit more as we've seen today and other panels that you've run, which is really a diverse cross-section of society coming and talking about important subjects and leading. I think, though, the key difference as well, in addition to the kind of diversity piece, is I think leaders will need to be different in terms of empathy. So the most successful leaders have always been empathetic. They've always been able to tune into their beneficiaries, their employees. I think being able to show your own vulnerability, be authentic, and be empathetic to those around you is going to be an even more important definition of success and successful leadership. So again, not just about business performance and shareholder value, but the how and how you show up, I think will be really important. And I think, I've written down that it might have been Savile Row suits and silk ties previously. It'll be, diverse going forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. fully agree. And Manisha, any thoughts from you on this question?
I agree with what Cindy and Simon have said. I think particularly the empathetic side of who we are, it's going to be more and more human-led is where I go. So despite all of the technology that comes in, despite the way that we're moving in terms of the digital forefront, and I say this operating in that space, actually we'll come to value and rely on the human interactions more. And so how do we understand that? How does that play out in a digital world? You know, as we start to move into worlds of meta and virtual platforms and, you know, kind of imaginations of who we be it or not our physical self. What does that really mean? And how do you know whether your team is really feeling connected or not? And so understanding those hidden cues means, for me, I actually think we'll go the other way. I think that whilst technology will help us, it will only augment. It won't become the reliant system. I think we'll become more dependent on human interactions. We'll celebrate them, and that will give us a whole different persona, because it starts to mean that coming together becomes much more of an event, an occasion, a time to really understand each other rather than to deliver tasks and to do work. And I think that's the key, because we're going to need to be more asynchronous. We're going to need to trust, to empower our teams, to not feel we need to know everything. And to do that means that you've got to have those networks, those systems in place that says you go do, but we come together and we story tell, we share. And I think that's going to be the difference here. The whole CMI and the leadership bit I know is ongoing. I also know there's conversations about that. And I agree there is a lot more to do with leadership in what we've all discussed today.
Absolutely. Good stuff. There's a couple of questions that have come in from the live audience today. Thank you if you submitted a question. And maybe we need to sort of chunk this down into two phases. But earlier on, Manisha, you acknowledged the importance of neurodiversity within your own team. And we've got a question asking for what advice we'd give to a neurodiverse manager who wishes to embark on becoming chartered. I just wonder, Manisha, if you've got any thoughts on that, and then I'll come on to the sort of support that's provided in the process in a moment.
Yeah, no, of course. So I go back to the assessment isn't there to get a tick box exercise. It's to help you understand how you are delivering against what we're looking for, against that kind of benchmark, but in the way that you now exhibit that. And I do think every application is individual. It's not set against where do you fit on this spectrum. And that's what's the beauty of it. So back to kind of what we talked earlier with Simon and myself of think about the experiences, think about the journey you've taken, and how have you then brought that to life in your way? Because actually what that does is it informs us as a chartership, as an organization, of how might we need to adapt to make sure that individuals can see that what you do and how you do it absolutely meets and merits against what we're trying to find and see. So I would encourage your openness in the way that you feel you represent or present what that is that they're looking for or seeking, and see it as a way of helping others now go, well, I do that too. Because neurodivergence are, I can't wait for a day when we don't need to worry about these terms. I'll be wholly honest with you, both in ethnicity and in our ways of doing. But the truth is we then need to normalize, and to normalize means we need to show that this is how it surfaces, and that's absolutely okay. But present the examples. That's where I'd go. Always present the examples.
Absolutely. And if I can just add that the process that we work with applicants for chartered status on is designed to be supportive at every stage and to help you bring out your strengths and so forth. And so if you're able to click on the link that's in the chat, you'll find out more information, but have a chat to the team at CMI around this. And what we want to do, and we do this through a lot of the materials that we provide to our member community, is acknowledge that everybody learns in different ways. We all think in different ways. And as we've talked about in this conversation, we all have different strengths. What we don't want to do is to ensure that only people with a certain skill set can have the confidence to pursue the chartered status. So we're there to support you throughout that. Have a chat with us within the team, and we can find the most appropriate way of ensuring that that you have the best possible experience as an individual going through the chartered award. We're also at the moment in the midst of some work to refresh our professional standards around management and leadership, and this is being informed by a lot of research that we're doing across this year, plus contributions from our companions, our members, our partners, etc. And towards the end of the year, we'll be looking to transpose that into ensuring that our chartered assessment processes keep pace with the change in those professional standards, and making sure that that process is accessible to everybody will be at the core of what we do there. I'd like to finish there, guys. I mean, we've had a conversation that's covered a lot of ground over the last 50 minutes or so, and a huge thank you to you all for everything that you've contributed prior to today to CMI, but also for what I've found to be really inspiring comments in the conversation from all of you today. So thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations again to Simon and to Manisha for your wins over the last couple of years, and thanks, Cindy, for all that you do for CMI. You're involved across so much of what we do on a voluntary basis, so it's hugely appreciated. If you've not yet had chance to become chartered, then again, there is a link in the chat where you can find out much more. And as I said earlier on, this is a great time to start that journey. There's some savings available on the assessment fees right now, and I hope you've seen enough from the three guys that have joined us today that there is huge merit in becoming chartered. But for now, thank you, guys. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Thank you.